My name is Adeline Mabel Holt. I was born in South Dakota in 1931. My earliest memory would begin in South Dakota, where I was born and raised. And we lived with kerosene lamps, outdoor toilets, no running water, no automatic heat. We had an old cook stove that had, you could burn coal or wood in it. And the stovepipes would get warm upstairs to keep the upstairs fairly warm, but water would freeze in the glass overnight. So it was kind of an experience. And us kids didn't have a nice lawn to play on like kids do today. We had flower beds and garden because Mom did a lot of cooking and canning and supplying. And then Dad was trying to farm, but he didn't make it into farming. I'm assuming that. And so he put in for a job out in Washington, D.C. with the government at the Naval Gun Factory, and he got hired. So he took off and went out there by himself, got an apartment, got started in his work, and then Grandpa and Grandma Holt picked up Mom and us four kids. There was me, Thelma, Phyllis, and Milo, who were the only children at that time. And we all got in the same car and headed towards Washington, D.C. That was quite an experience because they didn't have motels like they have today. They had little cabins and I believe outdoor toilets, but they had the neatest toilet paper. I tell you, us kids just packed up on it. Took it to the car and Grandpa says, "What have you kids got there?" We said, "Oh, this fancy toilet paper we were used to use in catalogs and stuff like that, you know." So Grandpa said, "Where did you get it?" "Well, in the toilet." And then he said, "You take it right back and put it back where you found it." So we were kind of disappointed. We thought we were going to take it to Maryland with us and show it to everybody. Can you imagine? I think I was about 7. I was the oldest. And Thelma and Phyllis and Milo behind me. Milo was just a little thing. It was a one-room schoolhouse. We didn't have school buses. We had to walk to school. And I mean, if it was below 0, you still walked. And we had a teacher, and she had, I think, first grade through probably the 5th or 6th, I'm not sure about that. But we didn't have that many kids in school, so we were all pretty close and friendly. And I don't recall if we had bathrooms in the school or not. I doubt it. I think we probably had to go to an outside privy. But we had a cloakroom, I remember that. And we'd put our coats and stuff in there. And then the teacher would call each of us up as per class, first grade through whatever we had back then. Her name was Zelski. That sounds like, could be Polish to me. And she lived with us at one time. And her room, I don't know where in the world she slept, because we put chickens up in one room when they come in the mail. They come in a box with little holes in them so they could breathe and stick their heads out. Us kids used to stick our finger in there and they'd peck around on our fingers. They were kind of amusing to us. But Mom and Dad put them up there in that room. They had a brooder, and they fed them up there and heated the room for them also. And us kids really kind of enjoyed that. Dad was farming at that time, and we lived in Florence, South Dakota, and that's north of Hazel, I think, where we lived when we left South Dakota. It's an interesting life, I can tell you, because I can remember everything, just about everything. But we had a man teacher at one time, and he was pretty good. He brought me lemon drops. He brought us kids lemon drops, and he was kind of a favorite of ours. I think he must have just filled in for Fern Zelski, because I don't remember him living with us or anything like that. But he was kind of an amusing person. And he got along good with Mom and Dad. And then I think we moved away from there, and we moved up to Hazel, South Dakota. That was our next spot. And we lived in a little house up there. It had rats running around in it. And we were lucky to have a bedroom, I guess, or beds at that time. But I just remember that place. It belonged to a relative, and we were just living there temporarily. And at that time, Dad went out on the road selling Watkins, I believe it was. And so trying to make a living doing that, and that didn't work so good. So then we moved out on a farm, not a farm, but big house, 2-story house. And I had already told you about that house, and that's where we moved from there to Maryland. Well, it was always good to see our dad. And he had an apartment, so we couldn't live with him. I don't recall where we lived at that same day. We might have stayed in a motel or something. But anyway, we eventually drove out to South Maryland in Piscataway. And my dad bought some land out there. But they had a house next door that was empty. And it was owned by a Hampton, Mr. and Mrs. Hampton. And they rented that house to us. And it had lights, toilets inside. Oh, we were thrilled. We had 2 bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom even, and toilet paper. It was quite nice. And somehow we got bed bugs. I don't know if we got them in that place or in the furniture that Dad bought after we set up housekeeping, and him and Mom built a house. They cut down all the logs, the trees. They had to treat them, take the bark off, treat them with creosote to preserve them and to keep the termites from getting into them. And they built that house. It was supposed to be eventually a chicken coop, and then Dad was going to build a house up front, further in the lot. Well, that didn't happen because Dad got the job as a post office, as a postmaster, I should say, in Brandywine. So we sold the place and we moved to Brandywine. And we got a 17-room house. It was over 100 years old. It was a hotel at one time. And us kids just had a ball running all over that place. 17 rooms, we just could run all day. And then we got up in the attic and found some things up in the attic. I don't recall anything remarkable that we found up there, but anyway, it was fun just going up there. And they had several rooms upstairs, no basement, living room, dining room, and 1 bedroom downstairs. But there was another room that Dad made into a bedroom. And us kids slept in that one. That was on the other end of the house. Well, that house was really big, and Dad dug out the basement himself with a horse. I don't know how he did it. He was a remarkable man when it come to building things or constructing things. I mean, he could do about anything, and he didn't have an education on it either. So anyway, he put the basement in there, and then he eventually turned that house into apartments, and he rented those out eventually. And we had some interesting people that moved in. We had one couple who moved in, and they were gamblers. So he'd get off work on payday, and they'd go down and spend all their money. Then they got home, and they didn't have any money. So what did they do? They left the kids home and went out when they gambled. And the kids got a hold of a rusty razor blade. I don't know if it was rusty or not, and they sliced the couch up. And so Dad said, well, you're going to have to pay for it, but he says, you haven't got any money, so I have to put you to work. So he put him to work out in the backyard. And I don't know how long that lasted. And I don't remember them staying very long after that, so they probably got it paid off or didn't, and they moved out. And then we got some people in there. Their name was Castle. Now, I still keep in touch with one of the Castle girls. The parents are both gone. And there was 2 daughters. And they were wonderful people. And so she had a thing on internet the other day about her dad and how nice he was. And I said, ah, yeah, I know. I remember your dad, Greeley, and your mom also. They were wonderful people. And so they lived there for quite a few years, and they had 2 apartments because they had his dad, Greeley's dad, and his new wife. I think he just recently gotten married. And they lived in one apartment, and then Greeley and Flora was her name, and the 2 girls lived in the other apartment. That was just the beginning of it. And then we had a guy upstairs in the single bedroom up there until Dad caught him urinating out of the window one day. I can't imagine people doing that when they got a bathroom. But anyway, they did. And I don't know, maybe he was drinking and got drunk or something. But that's all I remember that. And then we had the other end of the house. We had 2 apartments over there. And we had one family, they had 2 girls and a boy. He did. I guess he was divorced or his wife died, I'm not sure. And his name, oh, I wish I could remember his name. Fish. His last name was Fish. So we called him the Big Fish, and the kids were the Little Fish. And then in the next apartment, and there was a bathroom in between, so they had to share the bathroom. And the other apartment had a guy from not Vance, but Air Force place up in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure which one it was. And either Andrews or the other one, which I can't remember the name of that. Anyway, they lived in there, and he had trouble with his wife, and she had trouble with him. They didn't get along too good. But he made good money, and they stayed there until they moved. And they were from North Dakota, and we were from South Dakota, so we got along pretty good. And her and I stayed friends for years down the road. They moved back out to Minnesota, and then he passed away, and she moved out to California. And when I was out there visiting my son, she said, "You got to come up and visit with me." And so I did. I was so glad to get up there and see her. And then she stayed out there for a while, and then she moved south someplace. And then she moved eventually back to Minnesota. And then she passed away. I think she had Alzheimer's disease. And their name was Dennis Maidenwalt and Leon. And they had 2 girls. And they're still living, the girls are. So they became pretty good, long-stead friends of Mom and Dad's, even though they moved back to North Dakota eventually. Going to high school, we rode a bus from Brandywine to Gwen Park High School. That was the name of our school. And it was very exciting because we hadn't been in a big school before, just the one room. So this was quite a bit different. And we had different teachers for different things. And that was very exciting also. As I took an interest in art and music, and I loved to sing. And I got picked to sing "Oh Holy Night" one year. I thought I was pretty big, but I prayed to God that I wouldn't win because I got so nervous when I got up in front of the judges. And I didn't. Another guy got it, and he sang through his nose. If you have any idea how that sounds, not very good. But anyway, I think they decided that it was time for a boy to do it, because the same girl got it about every year, Beverly Meter. I'll never forget her. She was a good singer, though. Anyway, so I was there from the 7th grade till senior year. And then we graduated in 1950, and it was the 14th of June. I'll never forget that day. Very exciting to have our pictures taken. We had the caps and the gowns. Well, it was just an exciting time in my life, and most everybody's, because we were getting out of school finally. And then at that time, I lived home. I went to Washington, D.C., got a job up there in a department store up in the office, It's called the Mode Men's Shop. And I had that job until I met my husband, and then I got married and moved out to where he was. But that job was an interesting job, and I learned how to get on the buses and streetcars and stuff like that. I enjoyed that. And I had a friend of mine, Margaret Woodall was her name. She lived in a home, a friend of ours. Fortunately, her last name was Holt also. So I used to call her my mom. And I lived there, and like I said, until I got married and took off. Well, I was out in South Dakota visiting my relatives. I rode a Greyhound bus out there by myself. And my Uncle Herman, which is my mom's brother, and his wife, Margaret, wanted me to meet this nice-looking guy. So, and it was thrashing time. And thrashing, you get a lot of people from out of state that comes in here to work. So anyway, that's how I met him. And he was good looking. And
how old were you at that time?
Pardon?
How old were you at that time?
Oh, 19. 19, yeah. And I'm trying to think how that developed. He was in Vance Air Force Base, but he was in Washington, D.C. at the time I met him. And so he was out to the house and met my mom and dad. And my dad didn't take a liking to him too well. I think it was because he bought me a diamond and he didn't pay for it, and Dad got a billing on it. So he wasn't too happy about that. The guy can't buy a ring and pay for it and expect me to pay for it. There's something wrong. And so, but then Dad got to liking him after that because he was a drinker. That was our downfall, the drinking. But anyway, I loved Bill. I just couldn't live with the drinking anymore. Yeah. It really bothered me, and I was getting pregnant every year, seemed like anyway. We lived in Vance in Enid, Oklahoma. We lived out there until Bill got out of the service. And then we traveled up to Minnesota, where we lived in Wisconsin with his mom and Bill's brother and Bill's sister, 2 sisters. We all lived in one house. Well, his oldest sister was married. She had a husband, his name was Walter. Walter Buchholz, I think was his name. And they didn't get along too good, I don't think. They had one daughter. I lived there until I told Bill, I said, we got to get our own place. I can't live in this house any longer. It's too confusing for me because Grandma Wasson was kind of a particular person, and she wanted to spoil the kids, and I wasn't a spoiler of kids. I mean, I'm firm with them. And that doesn't mean they didn't get in trouble. They still got in trouble. But I made them mind anyway. And it paid off in the end. And then we lived there until I said we went back up to Wisconsin. And we lived in Wisconsin in a 2-room house with 1 water spigot, which was cold, and an outdoor toilet. Again, back to the outdoor toilets. And we rented this place. It was a farmhouse, and we had 2 rooms, a kitchen and a living room, bedroom combined. So we went out and bought a couch that makes into a bed. We bought a cardboard closet. We didn't have that many clothes. We'd get them all in there. And then we'd sleep on that bed. Well, it wasn't a bed, it was a couch to hide a bed. But if you put it down for a bed, it's a pretty good sized bed. But one side, if one person was on one side and the other person got out, it'd fall over, and they'd roll out on the floor. So we had to warn each other when we slept. God, it says, I'm going to get up now, so you're going to roll out of bed, so you better look out. Anyway, we slept we slept like that until I got pregnant with Debbie, and she was born while we lived in that house. I had trouble with in-laws then again because they tried to tell me how to raise a child, and I didn't like that. I'm my own person. So anyway, I called up Dora Lee one day and I said, "Can you take?" We had an old Ford. I think it was an old Ford. It wasn't much of a car. It didn't have a heater in it or nothing. And I called Dora Lee to see if she'd take me to the doctor because Debbie had cried that night quite a bit. And she said, "Oh, that's all in your head, Adeline." She says, "There's nothing wrong with that child." And I said, "That's fine. You don't have to take me. I'll just take the old Ford and I'll go up there and I'll wrap Debbie up real good." Well, then she come down and picked me up, took me up there. Then she tried to tell the doctor what was right and what was wrong. It was a mess, I'll tell you. But anyway, she did. She wasn't getting enough nourishment. I was breastfeeding her, and she just wasn't getting enough nourishment from my milk. So he put her on a formula, and then from that time on, she did pretty good. Now, her bed was a basket setting up on a table that we got from Bill's mom. And that was, so we had a table in the kitchen, I believe. And we had to go out and buy a refrigerator and a stove, so we got them on time. I think we paid $25 a week for them. Bought them up in the Tamarack area someplace up there. And that's all we had. I mean, we had just a little bit of nothing. But I got to tell you about one time in the wintertime, we had a slop bucket. You know what a slop bucket is? Where you use it for nighttime elimination so you don't have to go outside. Also for dishwashing water and bathing water. And so Bill would empty that bucket every morning. The steps were icy, and he didn't realize it. And he slid down the steps. The bucket went up in the air and all over him. He was so doggone bad, and I don't blame him for that. But anyway, he got over it. He had to come in and get cleaned up again. But that was hard because not having a bathroom and then you having a baby too to take care of. You had to bathe her by hand. It was it was quite a chore, and hanging out clothes on the line till they froze, and your hands froze right along with them. And you had to hang them babies out there, not babies, clothes, and hang them up. And they don't get dry, they get stiff. And then you can bring them in. Then you have to lay them all over around the house so they get dry. And we had maybe a dozen diapers is all we had. And so we lived there until we went to Maryland, back to Maryland. Bill got a job with the government, and we were living in a Greyhound bus depot upstairs. And it was active with the Greyhound bus. Also, the men had some kind of a club where they had the upstairs dance hall, and you could go up and dance. And that was right off from our apartment. So we had privacy, but not a lot, you know. But anyway, we lived there until Bill started his doggone drinking again, and, well, he didn't start, he always did drink, but he got really bad. And so I had a friend call me up one morning, and she said, "Well, I just found out where the Lover Boys are. They're down at Dooley's Bar sitting." And I said, "I'm going right down there." So I drove down there, and I went in there, and I patted him on the back, and I said, "Come on, we're going home right now." "I'm not going home right now." And I said, "Okay, I'm going to go home, and I'm not going to be there when you get there." So I went home, packed Debbie up. I'm pregnant with Billy now at this time too. And I took Debbie, and I went over to a friend of mine, Margaret Woodall was her name. And I said, "Can I come over to your house and stay for a couple nights? But don't tell Bill if he calls that I'm over there." So I went over there and stayed with her, and I was telling her what was going on with the drinking and all. And she was having trouble with her husband too. I guess he molested her daughter, which was his daughter too. Anyway, that's another story. But anyway, so I stayed over there, and so Bill did call, and she said, no, I haven't seen her. And so I said, I'm going to just stay here long enough. I can't stay too long because I got to get Debbie back home. Anyway, when I went back, I was going down the road, and here comes Bill along in a car with somebody. And he says, you get the heck out of that driver's seat. I'm going to drive. I said, no, you're not driving. You're drinking. You get in the back seat. So he finally eventually got in the back seat after a little bit of arguing. And then I don't know if we got home and argued some more or what from that point on. It was just drink and argue and drink and argue. And finally I decided that this is not for me. So we went back to Wisconsin and lived. We got along for a while until we moved to Illinois. And that's where we met Lois and Homer. They were good friends of ours. And we lived up there, and we lived in an apartment. But Bill didn't stop his drinking, so I just made plans to get out of there. And I got into it with Dora Lee and his sister. And I told her, if you ever come to Illinois, you better find a motel, because there's not room in the same house for you and me. And she could be a troublemaker in some ways. But anyway, I'm not saying she's all bad. She wasn't. They were good people to some degree. But Dora Lee was into everybody's business. Anyway, so we lived there until we moved up to Illinois. And we got a house up there that was, such a house as it was. Wooden floors, no rugs on the floor, no screens on the windows, and it was hot, no air conditioning. But we slept in there, and the kids got bit up with mosquitoes so bad we had to keep the windows shut. So I remember that. Well, we lived in there, and then we finally bought a mobile home. It was a red mobile home, New Moon, I think it was. And we moved into that. And that was pretty darn nice, pretty modern. It had running water and a toilet and bunk beds and a bedroom in the back. So we lived in there until I just said, I'm not going to take it any longer, Bill. I can't do it. I'm going to the attorney and file for divorce. So that's what I did. And he sits in there and he said, is this really what you want, Addie? And I said, no, this is what I have to do for my sanity. And so that's the way it was. And then I got the trailer. Of course, I got to pay for it. And I got a job at Owens, Illinois, up in Streeter. And I moved up there by myself. And I got into a trailer park. And it was cheap rent there. It wasn't much of a trailer park. But anyway, I lived there until, and I worked at Owens, Illinois. I made pretty good money there and to sustain myself, but I never got any help from Bill at all. I took him to the attorney. They said, we can't help you. If you didn't have a divorce, we could. But if you got a divorce, it's just no good for us. So I'm sorry, I can't do it. And so I lived up there until I met somebody else down the road. That's another story. Anyway, and Bill was working in Marseilles in the beer truck business. He lost that job, and then he got a job with a bread company, I believe it was. And so I told him, I said, I need some money for the kids to go to the dentist. And he says, well, meet me. He said, I'll come over and pick you up, and we'll go down to the bar and have a drink. Oh, sure. Okay. So down to the bar we went, and we had a drink, and he gave me the money, gave me how much money I needed. I put it in my purse, and so I had to go to the bathroom. And while I was gone, somehow that money got taken out of my purse. And I said to Bill, you took it out. He said, no, I didn't. You better start searching everybody around the bar. I said, no, because I know you took it. And that's just the way it is. And so I didn't, I didn't get the money after all. But he said, "Oh, you could buy me a drink." And I said, "Well, I guess I could do that." And that's how I found out the money was gone. It was, so anyway, I went home. I thought, no money again. It was it's just a hassle to get any money, any support from him as long as you're divorced. You just can't do it unless he's got the money and he can give it to you. So anyway, I needed some money, and I went over to where he was working, and I walked in there and I says, "Bill Wasson here." "Yes, ma'am, who are you?" I said, "I'm his ex-wife." And they said, "Oh, okay. Well, all we know is he moved up north to Wisconsin someplace." I said, "Trumpelo?" They said, "Yep, that's the name of it." I said, "Okay." So I knew I wasn't going to get any money after that point in time. So I just got along by myself. I made pretty good money in Owens, Illinois, and we made it. Somehow you make it. My first baby was Debbie, and she was born on January 17th. I can't tell you what year it was. But anyway, we were living, where were we living? I guess in that red trailer that we had down in, were we living in Winona?
Do you remember? Where's Debbie born? Hospital in
She was born in Winona,
Okay.
so must have been living,
Goodview?
You weren't living at Grandma's house?
no, not them.
No, because you had that little apartment. Was it in Alma?
No,
Waukesha?
we were living right in Winona, I think. No, we had to be living in a farmhouse that we were renting. And she was born there. That's where she was born. And we were she was in a ward where they had lots of babies and mothers in the same ward. And one woman raved about all the hair Debbie had. She did have a lot of hair. And she said, "I'd like to borrow your rooster." She says, "I'd love to have a baby with hair like that." And I said, "Well, I don't know if he has kind of a reddish hair." But I said, "You're welcome to him if you can get him." So that's where she was born and raised, mostly down there for, it gets a little bit hairy as to remembering dates and stuff.
Yeah, no, that's...
All total 6.
And the names?
Debbie, Bill, Kenny, Cheryl, Patricia, and Charles.
All right.
Well, I believe it was determination to live through what I've been through and keep on going. It must have something to do with my longevity, because I didn't have time to get sick. I was too busy with children and working. And that's just the way it goes. I mean, I was determined to raise those kids and bring them up to the best of my ability. And it takes determination, strong, a lot of strength. You don't feel like it sometimes, but you were determined because you knew you had to do it.
And maybe your little bit of thoughts about what that's been like. And that's your...
Okay.
And how did you like our last Wasson-Mosier reunion?
Oh, I thought it was very interesting and a lot of fun. I really enjoyed myself, and I was in better shape than I am today. That made it a little easier. But no, it was great meeting all of the kids. So it was always interesting.